I'm slide free today, so no PowerPoint. You've seen the graphs and data. I agree with my colleagues, except on one point. There are two bright spots in the U.S. economy. There's a lot of, if you follow economic matters, I think all of us do now, by virtue of being in the longest, deepest recession in modern history. By modern history, I mean post-World War II. The Great Depression is about as relevant to today as the Revolutionary War economies were to the Great Depression. I mean, we're a long way away from that kind of structure in our world. But post-World War II is the modern economy. This is, and if you, by any measure that you would choose, we have been in recession longer than any time by a factor of more than two. If you are doubtless experiencing this in your day-to-day lives, and everyone is at most one degree of separation from somebody underemployed or unemployed. So bright spots in the economy matter. The two bright spots are oil and gas, of course, and the tech sector. The tech sector is on a tear, for those of you who follow that, and not just with the release of a new iPhone or Android tablet, but because of the fundamental structural changes that are now underway in the tech sector. And as you might have guessed from my introduction from my friend Jeff, I'm basically a tech guy. I come to the energy domains through a prism looking at technology. So let me give you a few facts to think about as they're tech-centric that are informative about the oil and gas and energy sector, and then tell you what the implications are for those things. First, let's just start out with patents. Because if you're a tech guy, the way you measure the strength of a tech company, in fact, there are ratings every year of the companies that have the most patents or the most effective patents. I have a few patents from a long time ago when I was actually doing useful work in building and inventing things. I like to think some of what I do today is useful, but I actually don't build anything anymore. If you measure issued patents, it tells you something, not patents filed. When I do due diligence, which I used to do, and do some still on acquisitions and investments in tech companies, you always look at the patent portfolio. And you don't look at what they applied for, you look at what got issued. What's issued is what matters, because you can apply for anything you want with the USPTO, but you may not get a patent. So last 5 years, just as a benchmark for you, total number of patents issued in the entire panoply of things that are considered alternative energy. By that I mean everything from wind and solar to methanol to ethanol, fuel cells, the whole schmear. I mean, that whole domain, there's been 65,000 patents issued in the United States. It's a lot of patents. So that means it's a lot of innovation, because patents are, generally speaking, fairly innovative. That is, you can't, as many patents as there are, I can attest to this from a first-hand, it's hard to get a patent because a lot of stuff's been invented. I mean, frankly, it's very difficult to get patents. So 65,000 patents issued in all the green and alternative energy, non-hydrocarbon spaces in the last 5 years or so. In the hydrocarbon space, oil, gas, and coal, you can also count how many patents have been issued in the same time period. And considering that one of them has been highly incented by both a stimulus package, by subsidies at state and federal level, and by venture money. The venture capital community in Silicon Valley deployed roughly $50 billion over a period of 5 years in green tech, yielding essentially 0% return, by the way, but a couple of notable exceptions, but they've abandoned that field. It's essentially been left, and the net deployment of venture capital into green tech is on a very steep downward slope. There's a few diehard true believers spending money there for emotional, I think, and political reasons, but not for investment reasons. So hydrocarbon domains have not had a lot of money thrown at them from the venture capital community. Some, Bill Gates among them, by the way. He is a major investor in a microseismic imaging company for subsurface imaging for oil and gas. Most people don't know that. So he's a believer. So 65,000 patents in the green and alternative energies are unrelated to hydrocarbons, and the hydrocarbon space has seen 150,000 patents issued in the same time period. I would just suggest, if you're an analyst, that would tell you something. There's some innovation going on, probably. How would you measure the effect of the innovation? Well, one would be to look at the output of oil and gas in America. That would be one measure. But there's another measure. If you're an economist or an analyst, what you would look at on any piece of equipment, if you're a business guy or gal, you'd say, how much money do I spend for my equipment to yield how much money in the product, whatever the product is. When you buy a piece of hardware in a factory or any business, it has a capital cost and a revenue yield. And these are the ultimate reductionist measures that matter. That's what, in the end, I'm a physicist, I like physics, I like tech, But in the end, it's the money that matters. The laws of physics always prevail, but they don't work so well if you don't make any money. I mean, in the business world, you need to make money. So you measure CapEx against dollar return. So you can measure this for energy things. So it turns out that technologies improve solar, photovoltaic arrays, and wind turbines rather dramatically in the last couple decades. In the last 20 years, we've seen a 200% improvement in the revenue yielded per CapEx dollar invested in building a solar array or a wind turbine. 200%. I mean, this is not the efficiency of a turbine. This is the all-in cost to build the thing and get money out. 200% gain ain't hay. And it explains, by the way, subsidies aside, why there are a lot more wind turbines in the world and more photovoltaic cells. They're more affordable. They produce more revenue per dollar CapEx. So it's 200% over 20 years. If I go to the oil and gas fields and use exactly the same metric, which is CapEx in, to drill for oil and gas and measure revenue out, we also see a 200% gain in 3 years. So that one fact, that's all you need to know to understand why there is this stunning increase in oil and gas output in America. That's the single fact that's informative, because you can make so much money so quickly. There's been such a rapid change in the efficacy of the technology. I'll give you a third sort of tech-centric fact that relates to jobs, because I think the ultimate measure is not just money, but in every economy is getting people employed, because the only way economies function ultimately is when most people are employed, earning a living that's permanent. It's not a difficult economic maxim. If you don't have most people employed earning a living permanently, economies collapse, because you can't have a minority of people employed and a declining income supporting everybody else. This is not complicated economics. It's not even economics 101. It's painfully obvious. So let's look at employment. Let's compare the tech community to the oil and gas guys. I mean, it's the obvious place. Let's compare San Jose to Houston, for example. I mean, it's not a bad place. I mean, Houston's booming. Silicon Valley's booming, right? This is easy data. You go to the Fed, the federal data for the Federal Reserve, and you can look at total employment, not oil and gas sector employment, total employment in Silicon Valley. Because if Facebook's booming, it's not just Facebook. They don't hire everybody. You got gyms are booming, restaurants are booming, service companies are booming, health businesses boom. Everything booms around a booming catalyst. Because stimulus does work, by the way. There's nothing wrong with a stimulus. Stimulus do work. Some work better than others. I mean, that's how economics work. Every economist recognizes that you want to catalyze local and national economies by having a stimulant that causes growth everywhere. You want what I would call the ripple out effect. Something happens in Silicon Valley, it ripples out. It impacts first the valley and then the country. So Silicon Valley, San Jose, the MSA for San Jose, that whole area, has outperformed the United States in terms of job recovery by a significant amount. In that domain, when you measure employment, what's happened if you measure from 2007 to date, the change in total employment for the nation, as you all know, we're at about 98.7%. That is, we're still underwater nationally. The nation has not returned to the employment level of pre-recession. In Silicon Valley, it's at 103%. Now, in the employment statistics, a fractional percentage point change is a big deal. 3 percentage point changes is a huge deal. So Silicon Valley total employment has done extremely well. Compared to the nation, you should be unsurprised. How's Houston done? It's up 114%. Done a lot better. I'm not talking about people working in oil and gas. In the whole state of Texas, fewer than 9% of the entire population of the state of Texas is directly employed in oil and gas. This is also true in California and Silicon Valley. Only about 10% of the people in Silicon Valley are directly employed by Facebook and Google and Intel and Apple. They work in surrounding industries. Now, you can look at this at the national level, by the way. The total employment now, this is in every state of the union where oil and gas production has gone up. It's not just Houston, and not just North Dakota and Texas. All 10 states of the union where oil and gas production has increased, every single one of those 10 states, not some, have outperformed the national recovery in employment. All 10 states. Now, there's other things going on in those 10 states, like Louisiana and Colorado and Ohio, but there's a 1-to-1 correlation. There's no single state where that hasn't occurred. And even in direct jobs, let's look at direct employment. If you wanted a job, you came out of school, you want to work for an oil company, big oil, or do you want to work for big data? They're both booming. But who's creating more jobs directly in their domain? So one last sort of tech factoid for you. When the recession hit, the big data community, which by that I mean the information sector, which includes publishing of papers, publishing of movies, includes Google, Facebook, software, Microsoft. It includes Splunk. You know, I wouldn't include WhatsApp because WhatsApp only has 55 people in it, even though they got bought for $16 billion. So they didn't create a lot of jobs. They created a lot of money. Wouldn't it be nice to be there? But it didn't create a lot of jobs. They created 55 jobs. Pretty high ratio if you're the investor. It's pretty nice. But if you look at the whole information sector in BLS data, what you'll find is that when the recession hit, it got whacked. It was a 10% cut in total direct employment in the information sector. It dropped 10 percentage points, and it's flatlined ever since. It's flat, has not increased. If I look at the oil and gas sector, direct employment, when the recession hit, it took a ding out of it, but it's gone up 40%. So now the oil and gas sector, broadly speaking, is directly employing almost as many people as the entire information economy. It's booming, and it's creating jobs directly in that sector. You can see it hypertrophied in North Dakota, but it's doing that everywhere. To my colleague's point, you're seeing it even in the state of New York, which has no fracking going on because of the spillover effect from the Marcellus Shale development. It's all the engineering and support services work that gets done by businesses in the adjacent state. So it's a pretty. I mean, those facts are pretty indicative. So if I'm in Washington, I'm looking for jobs. You do want to provide incentives for people who want to build tech companies, but I would suggest that if we want to get behind an existing tailwind, we ought to think hard about following some of the advice of the U.S. Chamber and my colleague Bill at the Marshall Institute, that we should get behind accelerating, not impeding, the oil and gas and coal sectors of the United States, because there's a lot of jobs being created there already. So these facts sort of point to, I'll leave you with a couple other thoughts, to a sort of a foundational problem in the policy world. Policies are anchored in paradigms. They're anchored in the way we think of the world. And as the data that you've just seen presented to you suggests, the way we should think about the energy world has been fully reversed. And that would suggest that we should reverse policies. All of the energy policies that exist in America, essentially all of them, derive directly from the 1975 Energy Policy and Conservation Act, which was anchored in a very simple set of two fundamental facts. The United States was the fastest growing consumer of energy in the world, and we had a radical decline in our ability to produce energy at that time. Never mind what the reasons were, we just weren't. So we had incredible increase in imports, a reduction in our capability to produce, and we're the biggest consumer. Imports going up, which drain our economy because they drive deficits, and demand screaming along. Totally reversed. In today's world, we're now the slowest growing consumer of energy. The fastest source of energy demand is, of course, outside of the United States. The world is going to add 2 United States worth of demand, worth of energy in the next 25 years. 2 United States worth of demand, incrementally coming outside of the United States. And we're now the fastest growing producer of energy in the world, period. No other country on the planet, none. In fact, all of them combined are not increasing their production of energy as fast as the United States, in particular North America, combined. What this would suggest is that energy policy is upside down. But just fundamentally, we've got it backwards. We did the right thing in 1975 on the face of the evidence of what was going on at that time. The world's changed. It's time to do something different. And the doing something different will drive a stunning increase in employment in America, because it will accelerate all the trends I just described, which is not instead of or despite the big data revolution. It complements it, it fuels it, it provides a capital for it. We are driving foreign direct investment into America now when we were worried about all the capital leaving America. The EIA is now tracking this. People have not generally tracked this phenomena, but we've seen $280 billion of foreign investment into America because of the revolution in oil and gas production. We've seen $100 billion in new investment in manufacturing plants, primarily chemical manufacturing plants. In the last 3 years alone, when these come online in the next 4 to 5 years, they'll add 1 million manufacturing jobs in America, which are not included in any of the forecasts from the EIA. They're not included in any forecasts from the BEA or the Census Department. No one forecasts this because it was a total black swan, if you like. A predictable black swan, I should add. I mean, I predicted it, I have to say. I get the I told you so. My book with my colleague, which was called The Bottomless Well, was not a book about oil per se. It was about technology and energy. And we believed then, and we wrote that at the time of the peak hyperbole or peak oil, that we would see the fruits of the new technologies soon, Take a few years, and the United States would return to become the dominant energy supplier to the world. We have. Last point I would make for you, sort of a factoid that matters, building on the comparison between big data and big oil, is that people on the Hill frequently say to me that if we do things to provide help to the oil and gas sector, we're really just helping big oil. And nobody wants to help big oil because big oil is, big oil's evil, obviously. I mean, you watch movies where everybody knows big oil is evil. So let's just not argue whether big oil is evil or not. Let me just tell you that big oil has nothing to do with the jobs and the revolution in the energy sector in America. The oil majors did not ply the shale fields. The revolution in oil and gas production in America came almost entirely from small and mid-sized companies, 20,000 of them. Even the biggest of the miners, call them super miners, like Apache and Pioneer, they're a tenth the size of big oil. They're all tiny companies by big oil standards. And they are the ones that have driven this revolution. It's a very classic, dynamic, American entrepreneurial story that's exactly the same as what goes on in Silicon Valley. The little companies become big, and there gets to be consolidation. That's going to start happening in oil. But right now, it's a small business revolution, just like it is in the rest of the country. The majority of people are employed by small businesses. The majority of net new job growth, 60%, according to the Small Business Administration and the Commerce Department, come from small businesses. Well, almost 100% of it in the oil and gas sector is coming from small businesses, not 60%. And it's echoing into the rest of the economy where 60% or 70% of all net new jobs come from the small businesses they create. So these shale ecosystems that exist in the United States are not because of the discovery of new oil. When you read a story, what you really generally read, somebody writes, they discovered a new oil field. They discovered the Marcellus. They discovered the Bakken. They discovered the Wolfcamp. There's lots of names to these shale fields. Well, the shale fields have been there for a long time, about 1 billion, maybe 2 billion years. The U.S. Geological Survey discovered them 100 years ago and mapped them out. This is not a discovery. Nobody drilled a hole to find them. This is a technology revolution driven primarily by information technology. Hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling are the secondary tools that are enabled by the ability to see where to drill and steer the drills and to manage the ecosystem that's there, all with IT. This is an IT revolution. It's actually a big data revolution. And it's generating more jobs faster than Google can, which is a wonderful thing for America. It's not the only thing America is going to be in the future. We're not going to be a resource-centric economy, but it's one hell of a stimulus and a heck of a catalyst, which we should do a lot more with. Thanks.